And I'm told I'm recording. Thank you, Danchita. Yeah, originally when I gave this talk last year, I called it the blame game, and which I thought was a catchy title. But I thought, no, it's actually moving, hopefully, from blame to openness. And this is what I'll try and explain as we go through the talk here. So how do we get into this vicious cycle of the blame game? Well, it starts when we don't get our own way. We see something we don't like. We lose something we value. Now, this sounds like a definition of the Buddhist term called dukkha, which is translated as unsatisfactoriness, suffering, or I like on a more subtle level, a sense of unease with our existence, if you like, existential unease. It is inevitable that dukkha arises, that this uneasiness or unsatisfactoriness arises from time to time through our lives, although sometimes we get surprised about that. So we can be presented with these events quite frequently. Something we don't like, losing something we value. But at the point of dukkha, we have a choice. We can act in a way that is in line with the dharmic principles, or look for somebody or something to blame. Let's look at this blame choice, and then we'll have a look at the dharmic choices and perspective. We've had plenty of opportunity to experience dukkha over this last year, coping with the repercussions of this corona pandemic. And so plenty of opportunities to exercise this choice to indulge in the blame game or not. However, a lot of the time we're not aware that we have this choice, and we automatically select or direct our attention onto one event, a person, group of people, or thing to blame for what has happened. We can tell ourselves that we're holding them accountable, holding them responsible for what happened, and we can feel quite justified in this view. What comes to mind immediately on one end of the spectrum is sort of this idea of racial blame, political blame, but it also comes right down to very small occasions of blame we might have on a daily basis, little things that happen. At whatever level our choice to blame is, it's somehow guided by an underlying, unquestioned view of why things happen. These unquestioned views spring from our conditioning, and I think it can come from a narrow perspective of experience. So it doesn't seem like you have any choice but to habitually find fault and blame in the usual places. And they can be other people or it could be yourself, whatever your habitual tendencies are. I feel, for me, it also stems from a lack of awareness, a lack of this Dharma perspective that has left such views unchallenged. A great deal of our blame is based on speculation about what happened and on insufficient information. We can also fall into the habit of selecting information and bringing it on board to support our views or our ego biases. In the process, ignoring and ridiculing information that doesn't fit. So we don't have to look at it too closely, we can just dismiss it. And as we know, every time those views are supported in these ways, they and the blame associated with it becomes more solid in our minds, becomes more real. It becomes our instinctual response to a particular situation, to blame a certain event. We can blame ourselves, or we can blame others, or external factors. So we have this way of looking and matching a single cause to an effect, cause and effect. We've heard of that. The Buddha said, with the arising of this, that arises. Cause and effect, isn't it? Not quite, not quite. The Buddhist perspective of why things happen is not based on the assumption of there being a single cause for each effect. There's a much more open perspective. One can say an infinitely more open perspective. Conditionality, this central Buddhist principle, helps us recognize a wider confluence of conditions that give rise to anything that happens in the world at all. With reflection, the assumption or view that some effect or outcome is just due to just one cause can seem quite naive. Particularly struck by this when undertaking accident investigation when I was working in the chemical industry. So I was the company health and safety officer. This is some years ago when I did have a career. But by this time, I'd started looking at situations from this broader perspective, more multiple conditions leading to a particular event. Luckily for all concerned, the company had just adopted a 5 why approach to accident investigation. So this is how it worked. So you have an incident. So one day, a major incident happened at the plant. We're making a batch of resin. The reactor goes out of control, and there's an uncontrolled buildup of heat, threatening to explode the reactor. This is a potential major catastrophe and life-threatening incident. But the company had anticipated this might happen on very rare occasions, and an automatic safety mechanism kicked in to drench the reactor and cool it down before the heat got out of control. However, this left all the resin that were being made in this reactor gelled, it solidified. This, and how do you get it out? Huge expense, huge cleanup expense. So there was unfortunately, there was a single operator involved who expected to be held responsible. He knew that operators had been fired overseas for the same thing. So when we looked at investigating this incident, the first question in the 5-why process is why? Okay, the answer to that is the reactor was drenched because the heat in the reactor was out of control. Second why? Why? The operator added too much of the chemical to the reactor. Why? The heat in the reactor was climbing too quickly, and this chemical needs to be added to control this. However, this is not working. So I just kept adding the chemical, hoping it would help. I didn't know anything else to do. Why was that? The chemist wasn't there to help me. There were no other instructions. The product was very new, and I think it was tricky to make. Why? The chemist was only present for the first batch. The instructions were based on how that first batch was made, and it was different this time. It's a convoluted recipe, quite a lot of variables, but we just assumed that it was going to be okay. And we really have a really huge demand for this and a back order for this product. We really need it. It's a really great product. So there was a lot of pressure being put on to get this out, to make this batch. From this example, you begin to see and identify the varied and many conditions that give rise to this single event. On the other hand, blaming somebody means you only have to deal with one problem and no one else gets in trouble. We don't have to make difficult changes. These are some of the root causes of this sort of scapegoating behaviour. When we concentrate the blame on one person, everybody else gets off. In this case, the operator had been set up to fail by a range of complex conditions beyond his control that needed addressing. Luckily, with this 5-why process, we were able to identify that and to really verify that he had been set up to fail. We were able to drill down to some of those underlying causes. We knew who needed to address each of those various conditions to prevent it from happening again. So it becomes everybody's responsibility to find their part in the solution. It maintained harmony in the workforce as we work together rather than dividing into various camps of who was to blame. That was a relief. Very difficult situation, and it worked out harmoniously. Seeing this wider web of conditions that come together to give rise to any action or outcome is more creative, more open, and more compassionate. A more compassionate way of looking at what happened or is happening. There's a quote from this book, The Seeing That Frees, from Rob Burbrae. He has a little section on blame, which I thought was quite interesting. He says, "It is seeing in terms, not in terms of the self, not through the lens of self. When we're looking at a situation with an open mind and through the lens of conditionality, we are more open and in line with the way things really are." So that's what we're trying to, of course, achieve when we practice Buddhism, trying to see things more in the way they really are through this lens of conditionality. So situations are far more complex than they seem. When we look deeper at the underlying conditions, it offers us a more holistic approach and improves the outcomes through compassion in terms of getting close to some of those real causes rather than just sweeping under the carpet. It just gets closer to the truth of the matter. Every time we move to blame, we need to become more aware of this web of interdependence, that we are part of the conditions as well. To get a more whole picture, we need to look at our condition, our contribution to the difficulty, as well as what others bring. To soften this urge to blame, we need to appreciate our past conditioning that contributed to the difficulty and empathize with the conditioning of other people. This is why understanding our conditioning and being open amongst ourselves as a community is so vital if we are to make progress towards a harmonious and compassionate Sangha. It just happens that with awareness and compassion, we can make better choices. Who would have guessed? Even small changes to what we bring to a situation can change the result. Just being a little bit more present, more at ease, seeing the other person with a bit more empathy can soften the tendency to blame and can have a dramatic effect on the outcome. Always blaming others for problem relationships avoids examining our own part in the arising of conflict. This is really self-defeating, as we are then destined to repeat the same behaviours and have the same difficulties. See if you can notice a behavioural pattern in the arising of difficulties in your relationships. A quote from Padmavajra, an order member in the UK, blaming others is the most convenient way of not dealing with ourselves. There are people who go through their whole life blaming others as a way of avoiding looking at their own behaviours, leading to bitterness and disconnection with everybody. For myself, is to do with a lack of awareness and empathy for other people. This is why meditation practice is so important. We're trying to develop that awareness and empathy. So we've got it at hand when we feel that we're going to be triggered into blame. I certainly have to be on the lookout for a fixed view that can narrow down the perspective and lead to blame. Blaming certain politicians for certain events can be a trigger for me. You know, thinking that person is always late. Here I am waiting for them again. In fact, they may be working really hard to be on time and be held up by circumstances beyond their control. What I have done is to deny that they can change, which is another sort of Buddhist principle that we can change. We can't fix people. But we tend to do that, and blame then seems to follow. We tend to fill in the gaps. I have been made aware in myself of how engaging in speculation can arise in false conclusions. It's like joining the dots or filling in the gaps with our own biases. There's simply nowhere near enough information at hand. I can even find myself speculating on others' thought processes. We can do a lot of fabrication and jumping to premature judgments. This is where the fourth precept, the speech precept, needs to be developed further. We need to engage in a deeper level of truthfulness and accuracy, perhaps recognizing that on this occasion, we don't have all the facts. And there may be many other factors involved that we're not aware of. In these situations, we have to give others the benefit of the doubt, or kindly, with kindness, explore the details further. You can deny that you had anything to do with the arising of a situation that you're connected with. You can do that, but you always contribute something. Even if it seems as if somebody's projection on you is the cause of the difficulty, Examine how you might be feeding that projection. How much of a persona are you playing out towards them? Are we making enough effort to communicate with the other person to correct the projection? Or are we just letting it go? And then again, we can go to the other extreme and single ourselves out for what happened and take all the blame. We can take on other people's views about us. We may have a very heavy burden of conditioning. We can have a very high expectation of ourselves. Being a perfectionist can lead to a great deal of suffering when we don't live up to our unrealistic expectations. So we can build up a very critical self-view, which solidifies into, that's just me again, when certain situations arise. Like dropping something is due to my inherent clumsiness rather than carrying too much, or the object being slippy to hold. I used to say sorry a lot, as I thought I was always saying something that people might find or take the wrong way. I also blame myself for being a terrible bore and blaming myself when there was silence in a conversation. I had these really strange views about myself. So we can be particularly hard on ourselves. We can inherit these views from very, very early on, from our parents, from our teachers, people at school. We need to be more and more aware of them and question. It's a misunderstanding of karma to believe that everything that happens to us is our fault. You might want to examine and think, do you have the tendency towards blaming yourself? The principle of conditionality tells us there's no cause, no one cause to blame for the arising of dukkha or suffering. There's all our past conditioning to take into account, conditioning of others, what's happened to them in their life that's caused them to be that way, and all the external events and situations beyond our control that we are called to deal with every day throughout our life. They all intersect and influence each other all of the time. So if we can acknowledge all this when we find ourselves in disharmony with others, it becomes the basis of empathy and a shared understanding. We can then begin to look together at the dynamic in the relationship, making sense of the broader range of conditions at play, not zeroing in on that particular quality of that particular person or that particular cause. We need to be more curious and listen to ourselves and others. If we do that, we can go beyond the accusations to tackling and understanding the underlying views and conditions of the arising of disharmony and blame. No one wins the blame game. There's just suffering. And in the end, really, who is there to blame? Just leave you with that question, or that to reflect. So we'll now go into our breakout groups.